I want to talk about Eternals. Eternals is a 2021 superhero film from Marvel Studios. Inspired by the comic book series The Eternals by Jack Kirby, it tells the story of a race of immortal beings called the Eternals, who are tasked to rid the Earth of a species of apex predators called deviants by the celestial Arishem. Also ordered not to interfere with humanity's development if deviants weren't involved by the same entity, the return of the deviants sometime after the events of Avengers Endgame have also made them aware of their true purpose for being on the planet: to make sure the deviants didn't interfere with the upcoming death of the planet with the birth of a new celestial named Tiamat in an event delayed by the blip called the Emergence. And with Cersei newly made the leader of the Eternals, it's up to them to either delay the emergence long enough to relocate humanity, or to make sure Tiamat is never born.
Uni, meaning one, mind meaning mind.
Oh no, we heard you the first time.
Terrible name.
Well, brainstorm. Brainstorm! That's a way
No,
better
I
name.
invented it, so I'm calling it whatever I want.
While I have every right to say it in order to be a contrarian, I absolutely mean this when I say that Eternals has to be my favorite Phase 4 film in the MCU to date. Yes, I know Spider-Man No Way Home is out. Yes, I've seen Spider-Man No Way Home. Yes, I said what I fucking said. While I did enjoy that No Way Home utilized aspects of the multiverse saga started by the Loki series in order to make a better One More Day story than J. Michael Straczynski, Shang-Chi's exploration of complicated family dynamics, and Yelena winning the 2021 Best Girl of the Year award in Black Widow, Eternals was different in every sense of the word. When compared to the Marvel Studios films that came before it, Eternals felt like it abandoned its traditional tried and true formula to tell a story that's commonplace for it, but in a way that highlights the characters and their dynamics first and foremost. To me, Eternals felt more like a mature version of James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy films. And while I'm sure that's because of all the main characters are thousands of years old and have lived multiple lifetimes in order to gain and display said maturity, aspects of decision-making and emotional complexity that I've always wanted to see in an ensemble superhero film was granted to me in Eternals. And one of the best examples of said complexity is the reveal of Richard Madden's Ikaris, being the film's primary antagonist and the reasons behind his betrayal. The overall plot of the film, from the emergence to the celestial Arishem's plan to keep the universe in perpetual existence with planting celestial seeds in multiple planets while intelligent life lives on its proverbial eggshell until it's ready to hatch, the Eternals finding out their true purpose and learning that they had a hard factory reset after every planet they prepare before moving on to the next, thanks to the transition of power from Ajax to Cersei, gives the protagonists a lot of agency in how they see themselves, how they see each other, and how they see their connection to the planet that they've called home for thousands of years. Especially when Ikaris is revealed to be the only one after all this time still honor-bound by and dedicated to the will of Arishem, and seeking to make sure the emergence of Earth's celestial Tiamat happens by any means necessary. Now, operating from a traditional moviegoer's point of view, because I personally know nothing about the Eternals regarding how they were in either Jack Kirby, Neil Gaiman, or Kieran Gillen's run, the actions of Ikaris over the course of Eternals, especially in the third act, can be seen as treacherous, and they are. But treacherous does not necessarily equal villainous, and one thing Ikaris is not within the narrative of Eternals is a villain. An antagonist, yes. An antagonist in its actual sense is basically an adversary, someone who opposes someone, or a group of someone in this case, from achieving or completing a goal. To be a villain is to imply that part of Ikaris' dedication to Arishem's will is out of maliciousness, or that the will in question adds an evil agency to the plot. However, because of the needs of the many aspect that the cycle of celestial birth adds to the complexity of what it takes for the MCU to be sustained, the agency is more neutral, with no prejudice toward human life, or life on Earth overall, than it is evil. So, in this case, when a casual moviegoer/watcher watches this movie, witnesses Ikaris's actions overall upon the end of his treachery during the third act, and witnesses his final decision near the end of the film, one may be curious as to understand the machinations behind his decisions and how they make sense in the overall state of things that are presented. All that to say, they may find themselves asking this one question. Well, if he is an antagonist but isn't a villain, then why is Ikaris like this? Now, there is an answer to that question, one that I'm more than happy to explain in full detail over the course of this video if one cares to truly understand the machinations he goes through in Eternals. However, I'm going to have to explain a few things before I break down Ikaris' development in order to better bring things into context. Things like tropes, other characters in Eternals, one outside of the superhero genre completely, and, first and foremost, a concept created by a tabletop role-playing game that has since been utilized in how we digest personality analysis in fictional characters. And that concept is called character alignment. As you may or may not know, character alignment as we know it originated from the tabletop RPG Dungeons & Dragons. Co-created by Gary Gygax, the dude who said that gaming in general is a male thing, the bulk of how alignment works was inspired by 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, a 1961 novel by Poul that was expanded from a novella he wrote 8 years prior. The book was basically John Carter of Mars, but instead of a Civil War Confederate soldier being isekai'd off to a different planet, it was a Danish engineer who joined the Allied forces during World War II and is isekai'd to a world where France's Carolingian cycle of legends revolving around Charlemagne, the King of Franks, was real. In this world, there's a pretty obvious divide in land regarding the middle world, ruled by the forces of chaos, and the human world by the forces of law, which in itself was divided between the Holy Roman Imperial and Muslim rule. And while other works of fiction provided inspiration for the alignment system, such as the works of Michael Moorcock, not more as in give me more like Anderson's 3 Hearts and 3 Lions is the more prominent piece of inspiration that would grow into the alignment chart that we have today. I say that because when it was introduced to D&D with its first iteration in 1974, the alignment axis was extremely limited in where it would rotate, and that's because it only consisted of law and chaos, much like the lands in the book that inspired it. The secondary axis of good and evil wasn't added to the alignment chart until 3 years later. Since then, with Wizards of the Coast's purchase of the game from Gygax & Co. and later editions of the game, the official alignments constantly change from 2nd edition onward. And considering how aspects of the game's early days used the alignment system to justify things like racial prejudice and generalization, i.e. stereotyping classes based on a general one-layered understanding of the axis, penalizing players for both staying in and role-playing out of their chosen spectrum, and certain races, playable and non-playable alike, being inherently evil. Lots of modern-day players argue if alignment is even necessary in the game, limit its necessity to character and story development in their home games, or just remove it entirely. On the other hand, like Gygax's creation has evolved in a way that has easily surpassed his alleged misogyny and prejudice, not to mention his life, so has the concept of character alignment. While its necessity in Dungeons & Dragons has been the talk of the town for years, the ethical and moral axis it has come to represent has been applied to multiple aspects of fiction and media, specifically how we analyze individual characters in order to understand their core values and beliefs. So much so that the very concept of character alignment is so well known across fiction and pop culture that there's even a TV tropes page dedicated to it, which is how you know it's become such a staple. And while the evolution of fiction is constantly challenging this, the easiest paradigms we have in regards to how to accurately analyze characters according to the axis of character alignment are superheroes and supervillains. So, in the case of this version of Ikaris that we've received in the MCU, we must ask ourselves one question. In order to understand which spectrum of the character alignment axis Ikaris falls under, we have to look at the 9 possibilities within it and compare them to the behavior Ikaris displayed in Eternals. And we know that there are 9 possibilities because each of the axes presented in the alignment spectrum holds 3 possibilities that are easily interchangeable. The first axis is the ethical axis, the one that Dungeons & Dragons only utilized before Wizards bought the game. This axis consists of law and chaos. The second axis is the moral axis, the one that was added to the variant table from 2nd edition and beyond. As you can imagine, this axis consists of good and evil. Now, with these extremes, it only adds 4 options to the alignment chart. Lawful good, lawful evil, chaotic good, and chaotic evil. But where the others come from are in neutrality. There are simply some characters, and as a result people, who don't fit either end of the axis, fully or completely. And because that applies to both the extremes of law and chaos and good and evil, neutral was added to both in order to produce 9 possibilities instead of 4. Those 9 are as follows: lawful good, neutral good, chaotic good, lawful neutral, true neutral, chaotic neutral, lawful evil, neutral evil, and chaotic evil. Now, if I were to explain how each of these 9 alignments work according to how they've been properly represented in today's media and pop culture figures, this video would take forever. If you do want me to talk about these alignments and their pop culture apps separately, just let me know in the comments section and I'll consider it. But in the case of MCU's Ikaris, we have to do a bit of process of elimination right quick in order to come up with the most accurate outcome. So, are Ikaris's actions on the ethical axis more lawful, chaotic, or neutral? Well, when it comes to the ethical axis, chaotic characters lean more toward personal freedom than abiding by rules and regulations. Where they scale in how chaotic they are in the comparison to where they land morally, however, depends on the inner workings of their personality and their development over the course of the story. In the case of Eternals, every member with the exception of Sprite aligns more along the lawful side of the axis rather than chaos. Yes, even Druig in the beginning of the movie. Apparently for the same reasons I'm going to explain regarding his actions in the movie, Marvel Comics uses his powers and his philosophy as a reason to make him a villain. Don't quote me on that though, I've never read an Eternals comic in my life, and Jim Starlin has made it so that any attempt that I have made to read the cosmic side of Marvel literally gives me a migraine. However, not only do I think how Druig was handled in Eternals is a great example of how a character can be fluid with character alignment and still end up revolving around a specific spectrum of the double axis of ethics and morals, but his handling specifically just so happens to help us pinpoint not only Ikaris's alignment, but also understand his dedication to one specific aspect of it, the equality under law subtrope of lawful neutral. As I stated before, every Eternal featured in the Marvel Studios film falls under the lawful side of the ethical axis, with the exception of Sprite. Sprite, just like Tinkerbell as Kingo compared her to, is chaotic neutral, or at least grows more chaotic neutral over the course of their time on Earth. Her inability to grow to maturity and live a full life of the love of others like her fellow Eternals due to her being forever young by design, especially Cersei considering that she wants to know what it's like to be loved by Ikaris. Growing envious of humans because they have that capability, and her overall way of processing feelings and emotions reflecting that of a stereotypical teenager despite being on Earth for millennia, allows her the capability to think and act more selfishly than the other Eternals. Because of this, she never really considers context regarding the decisions that she makes, and instead acts on them because of her own feelings. The reason why she joined Ikaris in making sure the emergence happened wasn't because she wanted to follow Arisham's laws regarding how the universe worked. It was because she was in love with Ikaris and wanted to be free of the envy she had of humans that was only there because of what she coveted from them. And over the course of the movie, we see Sprite's actions reflect that selfishness and want of freedom, cause her ethical dial to turn from its neutral setting, because, let's just be honest, Sprite is a trickster entity through and through. She would never start off anywhere near lawful, to the chaotic one that feels more in tune with her overall development and philosophy. In the case of Druig, his ethical alignment in the beginning of the movie is lawful, but his moral choices had him constantly in a game of tug-of-war between moral neutrality and evil. What made his choices lawful as opposed to neutral or chaotic, however, was his decision to stop upholding the code of conduct bestowed upon him by Arishem and instead uphold his own. The thing about characters that fall within the lawful side of the ethical axis, good or otherwise, is that there isn't just one way to be lawful. A character's own codes of ethics they developed over time is just as important as the laws of society, possibly even more according to some. This is why, despite Superman being a poster boy for lawful good because of his post-crisis Boy Scout depiction following a mix of society's regulations and his own moral code of ethics, Batman can be considered lawful good as well, depending on how he's written. Because despite being a vigilante that operates outside of Gotham's own laws, rules, and regulations, he himself has a strict code that he enforces on both himself and other members of the Bat family.
No guns, no killing.
Where's the fun in that?
And he's so strict on enforcing those laws, both on others who work with him and himself, that even if said code has to be broken out of necessity or survival, then he's failed in his directive and is no longer capable of pursuing the cause.
Never again.
Druig's case is that of being indoctrinated by the laws of Arishem upon arriving to Earth to eliminate the deviants, only having the word of Ajak as the Celestial's prophet. As they continue to stay on Earth and witness the evolution of humanity, the combination of Druig's appreciation for it and how he learned his abilities can help keep them safe, albeit through the means that would rid them of their free will, cause him to develop an ideology and moral code of his own, especially after being told time and time again through said prophet of Arishem that such a massive interference in humanity's development isn't allowed. And upon reaching his limit by the time the Spanish conquer the Aztecs, he makes the initial decision to renounce Arishem's law, fully follow his own code instead, and dips his toes in the evil side of morality like that of his comic counterpart by completely mind-controlling both Spanish and Aztecian alike. However, unlike his comic book counterpart, not only does he not stay evil, but he doesn't even stay lawful either. By the time the gang seek his help to stop the emergence, aspects about his original goals and personal code have disappeared. Learning that utilizing his powers in order to protect humanity would only rob them of it in the end, he has abandoned not just the doctrine of Arishem, but his own original personal code he left the Eternals with as well, choosing to live in isolation in a small village he protects in the Amazon. It isn't until he learns their true purpose for being on Earth that his appreciation of humanity and his want to protect them gets him to help his fellow Eternals put Tiamat to sleep, placing him along the line of a neutral good alignment. Passively good, more specifically, thanks to his moral appreciation of humanity and wanting to keep them safe over taking any ethical code that may be lingering within him after his overall ordeal. However, regardless of what Druig's stages of alignment are over the course of the movie, one thing is constant in regards to his dynamic with Ikaris. They're always at odds with each other. Whenever Druig challenges Arishem's law via Ajax regarding using their abilities to interfere with humanity's progression, Ikaris is there to always challenge him back. Even when they find Druig in the Amazon when he sacrificed his lawful place in the ethic axis for that of a neutral one, especially after finding out that they're androids who get reset every time they get ready to head off to another world to prepare for the birth of a celestial, the two's animosity toward each other regarding their opinions about Arishem constantly keep them at odds. That's because characters that believe in equality under the law, the type of lawful neutral character Ikaris shows himself to be in Eternals, is one that holds not his own personal code, but the law of a certain society in very high regard. In this case, society represents the word of Arishem and his perpetual plan to keep the universe thriving with the constant death of planets with intelligent life constantly allowing the birth of celestials. To Ikaris, Arishem's word is law, and any attempt from others to change or amend it is unacceptable. Even when Ajax told him the ultimate goal of their presence on Earth a week before the emergence, the law applies to everyone, to someone who believes in equality under the law. Humanity is just the result of Arishem's design in motion. And every time Druig challenged said law, every time Druig attempted to place his own will above that of their creator and the voice of their creator, Ikaris retaliated, either verbally or physically. Because of their constant conflict regarding one's steadfastness to societal values and the other's development and implementation of personal values, the very animosity between Ikaris and Druig respectively over the course of the film was, in itself, a red flag to show us Ikaris' need of placing the societal law of Arishem over everything else. And not only over humanity, mind you, but also over his superiors, who he felt either had or no longer had any regard for Arishem's intended purpose for them. One who wanted to stop the emergence, and the other who wanted to delay it so that both humanity and Tiamat could coexist. So when it was revealed that Ikaris upholds the law of Arishem so high to the point where he's willing to betray the other Eternals in order to keep it in place, that fact didn't surprise Druig one bit. Hell, he was even able to correctly call that Ikaris eliminated Ajax because of experiencing the predictability of his doctrine all these years.
What have you done?
You killed her.
The funny thing about that is that those of us who were used to seeing this aspect of a lawful neutral character in an antagonistic role also experienced the predictability of the equality under law trope before. So much so that, also like Druig with the aforementioned example, A lot of us were successfully able to call Ikaris' decision to end his life by the time that they were able to abort Tiamat, due to the enhancement of Cersei's transmutation powers during the emergence, causing him to contribute to the Unimind without his consent. And it's all thanks to another character a good amount of us has been exposed to, just like Ikaris, named Inspector Javert. I apologize in advance to all my musical theater readers watching this before I continue on with the segment, but the 2012 version was how I was initially introduced to the musical, and I have literally never seen a single other version of it. So, with that being said, Inspector Javert is a character from the critically acclaimed musical Les Miserables, based on the novel of the same name by Victor Hugo. And thanks to his perception of the law, unquestioning allegiance to those in power, his depiction of society, and his sense of justice, Javert has become the poster boy of the equality under the law aspect of the alignment of lawful neutral. Despite Javert being the antagonist of Les Mis thanks to his obsessively endless pursuit of Jean Valjean, he is not morally evil. He does not seek him out just to hurt, oppress, or kill him for the sake of it, or because he gets pleasure out of it. According to his philosophy, obeying the law of the land is the closest a mortal can come to God, and does not make exceptions. Everyone is under the same level of accountability, punishment, and retribution according to its doctrine, and Jean Valjean is a rejecter of such doctrine and must be properly punished. Even if the law that the individual in question is persecuted for is unjust, i.e. stealing a loaf of bread to feed your starving nephew. To people like Javert, the circumstances behind the theft don't matter. The law is the law, and the perpetrator must suffer the consequences of their actions according to the law. This is what happens when the lawful side of the ethics axis is cranked up higher than the neutral side of the moral axis. There is no prejudice regarding why he is doing what he is doing, no ulterior motives or innate pleasure gained from pursuing Jean Valjean over the 17 years Les Mis encompasses that would make Javert justifiably evil as a result. While he may have his own opinions about individuals who break the law or live outside of it, he does what he does because he is dedicated to upholding the law in every shape and fashion, and holds it at such a high regard that morally good aligned traits such as mercy, forgiveness, understanding, and compassion don't even resonate within his thought process when going about distributing it. So much so that even when he errs in the eyes of the law, he's absolutely confused and bewildered when he's shown compassion and the like, instead of receiving the consequences of his actions as expected. Is it possible for characters like this to develop in a way where the dedication to law is turned down the more that they're exposed to humanity and how society pits them against each other? Absolutely. However, Javert, and as a result MCU's Ikaris, are such extreme representations of this aspect of lawful neutral that if anything happens that makes them even think about swaying away from their romantic dedication to law, whether they're societal laws or personal code, it would break their entire worldview as a result. Javert felt this in the aftermath of the revolution at the end of Les Mis. Thanks to the three-punch combo of Jean releasing him from the rebellion's imprisonment, seeing the bloody aftermath of their failed coup, and letting Jean Valjean escape with Marius. Him not following through with his duty to uphold the law by arresting Jean Valjean right then and there on the spot, or making do on his promise to open fire if he took another step further, despite Marius being seriously wounded, along with witnessing the age of the rebels that were gunned down, started to sway him. And despite seeing the result of the flawed societal law of France, and now knowing that it's not as sacred as he believed it to be, Javert can't bring himself to compromise his own principles that used said allegiance and unwavering dedication as its foundation, and being so torn between his inability to do so, that he commits suicide. And, as I explained earlier, Ikaris in Eternals is the same way. He fits how this aspect of lawful neutral operates and is carried out to a T, especially how one under the influence of this aspect of the alignment reacts when they're morally and ethically backed into a corner and aren't willing to make compromises with themselves. The only difference between how Javert failed to come to a compromise versus how Ikaris failed to come to one is that there were enough good aligned aspects of Ikaris' neutrality within him that were aimed at Cersei because of his feelings for her that was enough to jumpstart the doubt. And thanks to Ikaris' hesitation, it gave Cersei ample enough time to add himself and Sprite to the Unimind, in order to non-consensually give her the power necessary to transmute Tiamat into marble, forcing Ikaris to participate in breaking the law of Ereshkigal as a result. So now Ikaris has multiple conflicts going on within him, failing to uphold the law that is Eresham's will, being forced to participate in its defiance, and his overall feelings for Cersei getting in the way of him doing what's necessary to make sure Eresham's will for the planet was done. And, just like Javert, the inner struggle dealing with what he was willing to do, what he was forced to do, and why he couldn't bring himself to do it, all in the name of the law, leaves him in such a state of conflict that he either refuses to compromise in order to carry on living with the rest of the Eternals, or thinks that because of allowing outside forces to compromise his devotion to Eresham's word, that he's unworthy of it altogether. Then, with the actions that followed, MCU's Ikaris, like Javert in musical media, became the pinnacle extreme in superhero media of the equality under the law aspect of the lawful neutral alignment. Like I said before, readers, just because a character is an antagonist doesn't mean that they're a villain, and just because they oppose the heroes of the story doesn't mean that the overall agency that they represent or wish to carry out is intentionally evil. With the constant progression of storytelling blurring the lines between what it means to be good and evil in favor of exploring aspects of right and wrong, the evolution of character alignment into what we currently know it to be is very important in regards to showing audiences that the dogmatic views that are engraved within us regarding what makes a hero or a villain are, and in some cases should be, more complicated. Just because a character is lawful doesn't mean they have to be a hero. Just because a character is more neutral doesn't mean that they are intentionally malicious or cruel. Sometimes they realize through their own chaotic nature that they just want to experience things the way that others do. Sometimes they learn that their own personal lawful code is flawed and give up on it for the sake of finding themselves. And sometimes they experience such a sensation outside of their current understanding of ethics and morals that they just can't cope. And, as a result, they end up flying a bit too close to the sun.